welcome to Keeping Construction Moving. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that you are all well. My name is Richard Thompson. I am the Editorial Director of MEED, the Middle East Economic Digest, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Today's webinar is the third edition in the Mashreq Construction Club series of webinars. In the previous two editions, we focused on legal issues, force majeure, and the impossibility of delivering what you do if you can't deliver on your contractual obligations. And the second edition focused on contract renegotiation, how to respond to clients seeking to push down contractor and construction prices. You can find the on-demand recordings of those broadcasts on meed.com and on the Mashreq Industry Insights Hub, which I will show you the URL for that later. Today, we're looking at getting the construction industry through the COVID-19 crisis, looking at the challenges facing the construction industry, the pain points for construction companies, and how the industry and the government is responding to those challenges to get the industry through the current situation, but also looking beyond the current situation into how companies should be preparing and are preparing for what comes next in the near term and in the medium and slightly longer term towards the end of 2020 and into 2021. We have a wonderful panel of speakers today who I will introduce to you later on, and as ever I do invite you to take the opportunity to submit questions to our panelists. We have some very senior people with a lot of experience from across the industry, and it's a great opportunity to have your questions answered. I'm now going to hand over to Mohammed Al-Shuli, who is the Executive Vice President and the Global Head of Contracting Finance at Mashreq Bank, and Mohammed is our host for this series of webinars, and I'd like to hand over to him to say a few welcome words. So over to you, Mohammed.
Thanks, Richard. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you are safe and healthy. On behalf of Mashreq, I welcome you to our third Mashreq Construction Club in its digital format Connect series. As Richard mentioned, today's discussion will be around the emerging trends and the learnings we've had in the past experiences, which will allow us to navigate through the next era. While cash flow has always been a crucial element in the success of projects, it is now without a doubt the single most important element for survival. Proper planning and factoring contingencies, which have been the victim of price negotiations in the past, are key for better project execution. The last 2 months have shown us clearly that companies who have ring-fenced their project cash flows are faring better. I welcome Cynthia and Wael to this panel and thank them in advance for their insight. Also looking forward to Ed's views on the state of the market and what should be looking for in the near future. Welcome again to Mashreq Construction Club Connect series. Richard.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. So just to give you a bit of context for those of you who don't know, today's webinar is part of a long-running partnership between MEED and Mashreq. The MEED-Mashreq Construction Partnership was launched in 2017, and the aim of the partnership is really to support innovation and continuous improvement in the construction industry by providing a forum to share ideas, to enable access to knowledge, and to facilitate industry collaboration, which is probably one of the most important ingredients in the way forward for the industry. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, all of our content is available to you for free on the MEED Mashreq Industry Insight website. And you can see a screen grab of the website there, and the link is on the screen in front of you. And if you want to see the recording of this webinar or previous webinars or any of our research reports, it's all available on that hub. And the partnership, we've produced research reports, webinars, findings reports, and white papers. If we can go to the next slide, please, Nabil. So we've produced, over the past 3 years, 10 construction-focused research reports. In the bottom right-hand corner of this slide is our most recent report, which looks at waste and inefficiency in the construction industry. How much is there, and what can we do to remove that waste and improve productivity and efficiency across the industry? All of these reports are available on the Mashreq Industry Insights Hub that I just mentioned. If we can go to the next slide, please. One of our most important initiatives is the production of white papers. These are industry papers containing a set of recommendations on particular topics on how to improve the environment for construction in the UAE and to enhance project delivery, which is a key objective, obviously, for the government as well as for the industry. In late April, we produced our most recent white paper, which looked at the issue of contracts for construction, and in particular recommended, amongst 26 recommendations, it was looking at the potential for standardization of contracts in the UAE, and the white paper contains 26 recommendations towards that goal. You can find copies on the link shown on this slide and on the Industry Hub that I mentioned earlier. If we can go to the next slide, please, Nabil. Now, one final comment before we get into the discussion today. Your feedback is very important to us. We've done quite a few of these webinars now in the Mashreq series and in other verticals. It's important that we're getting the topics right, we're addressing the issues that you want to know about. So please take the opportunity to take part in this feedback survey. It's a very quick survey. And you can see at the end of this slide, I'll give you the link, at the end of this webinar, I'll provide you with the link to the survey where you can give us your feedback. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the discussion. So the theme for today is keeping construction moving. We want to look at the pain points facing the industry. What can be done to ease the financial stress on the construction industry? As Mohammed mentioned in his opening remarks, that's a key issue, and I know that the panelists are going to touch on this in a lot of detail. How can we overcome the operational challenges, the supply chain issues? What steps can be taken to ensure worker welfare? And how can we reduce time and money wasted? How can we lower our costs, become more efficient? So a lot of big issues, a lot to get through today. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, if we can go to the next slide, please. So we have a fantastic panel today. Cynthia Corbett is the Middle East Audit Chief Operating Officer and Middle East Construction Leader for consultancy Deloitte. Now, Cynthia has over 20 years experience in the construction industry in the UAE and around the world. She provides, serving a wide range of clients, providing auditing and accountancy services, and in particular, helping them to adopt new technology and new technology solutions in that area. Cynthia is also the author of the annual GCC Powers of Construction report, and I think the next edition of that report will be coming out in the next month or so. So welcome to Cynthia. We also are delighted to have Wael Farsakh, the Group CEO for Arab Tech Holding, with us today. I mean, nobody can be busier than the boss of a construction company right now, so it's fantastic to have you with us today, Wael. Wael has over 30 years of experience in the UAE construction industry. He is a structural engineer by training before going into general management, and before joining Arab Tech Holding, he was the general manager at Duttco Balfour Beatty. So vast experience and knowledge from Wael, and welcome to both Cynthia and Wael. And we are also joined by Ed James, the Director of Content and Analysis from MEED Projects. Ed is going to present a few slides for us to give us a picture of the size of the market from the project's perspective, using data from MEED Projects. Ed has 2 decades of experience studying, tracking, analysing, and commentating on the UAE, on the regional projects market. And we also are joined by Colin Foreman, MEED's Deputy Editor and our lead construction analyst, who is a regular panelist on our construction webinars. Colin brings also about 2 decades worth of knowledge and experience from Middle East and international construction. So welcome to all of our panelists. I do invite you all and encourage you all to submit questions as we go through. My job is to moderate your questions and to see that we try and answer as many of your queries as we can. Okay, that's more than enough from me. I'm going to hand over now to Ed to give us our opening set of slides, which are really setting out the kind of where the market is today, the size of the market and the pipeline of future projects. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Richard. Morning, everyone. Ramadan Kareem. Okay, so I'm going to briefly set context for the market today, looking at some of the opportunities and challenges in the region. And of course, the question on everyone's lips right now is how the COVID-19 and fall in oil prices is affecting project activity in the region. So this slide, taken from MEED Projects, looks at the full month of April. So it's the first full month where we saw the impact of the coronavirus. And it shows that, unsurprisingly, there was quite a significant slowdown in activity when you look at April year on year. So we can see that between 2020 and 2019, year on year, there was a decline of 43% in terms of contracts awarded in April. On the left-hand side, you can see how each country has been impacted. Basically, we saw an almost total collapse in spending in Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan, and Iraq. On the other hand, Saudi Arabia fared not too badly, almost flat year on year, and UAE was actually up slightly April to April. However, I think it's important to point out for the UAE that there was an exceptional $1.8 billion contract announced. And if it wasn't for that particular deal in Abu Dhabi for a Malaysian company called Serba, then actually UAE would have also been well down when you're looking at April year on year. So as you can see from these two graphs, the region has been fairly badly affected by the coronavirus, as you might expect. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So let's take that same data and look at it on a sector basis. And again, we can see that most sectors have been hard hit. On the left-hand side, we're looking at the first 4 months of the year, the first quarter of the year, the first third of the year. And you can see here that construction spending was down 36% year on year. It wasn't decline anyway in the MENA region for various reasons. But other sectors didn't fare too badly. Gas was up, power was up, transport up. It's, however, only when you look at April, the first full month of the pandemic, you can see that spending in all sectors except water was considerably down on an April comparison over the last 4 years. You can see construction was down 37%, unfortunately. Again, perhaps no surprise given the situation. Next slide, please. So we've analysed the active projects in the market to understand how many have been impacted by COVID-19. Since March the 1st, there have been a little over 500 projects either postponed, suspended, or cancelled as a direct result of the situation. On the left-hand side, you can see how each country has been affected. Saudi Arabia has had by far the most number of projects impacted by coronavirus, followed by the UAE. That might not necessarily be so surprising given that both of those countries also have the most number of projects. So as a proportion, doesn't look quite as bad. You can also see Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar have been also quite badly affected. In total, we're seeing more than $70 billion worth of projects postponed or cancelled due to the situation. And then on the right-hand side, if we can go back a step, please. On the right-hand side, you can see how each sector has been affected. Construction and transport are the two have seen the most project cancellations. However, again, it should be borne in mind that they also have the most number of projects. So on a proportional basis, not necessarily so bad. In the red squares, you can see the percentage of active projects in the sector that they constitute. So we've actually only seen 5% of construction projects put on hold or cancelled, compared with 11.7% of transport projects and nearly 15% of water projects. So various sectors have been harder hit than others. You can see that chemical industry, oil and gas, not so badly affected. Less than 5% of all projects have been impacted so far. Okay, next slide, please. So looking forward, I think it's also, obviously the market has been hit. However, I think it's also worth looking at some of the key projects expected to or scheduled to be awarded over the next 3 months. And as you can see here, there were well over $30 billion worth of projects expected to be awarded from now until July. And on the right hand side, you get a flavour for them. Now, not all of them will be awarded, some will be delayed. However, if you look at some of these projects, particularly in the power side and the oil and gas side, ones which are privately financed rather than financed by the state, then you do have a degree of confidence that they will proceed. And I think it's worth mentioning that while the market is down, we're still seeing tenders being issued, we're still seeing contracts being awarded, bids being submitted, and the market hasn't stopped. There is still activity going on, and obviously the hope is that when this is all over, the market will resume with a vengeance. Next slide, please. So how is this going to affect the year overall? Well, at the beginning of the year, we forecast $127 billion worth of contracts to be awarded in the GCC this year. That compares favourably with $105 billion awarded last year, although I would point out that a lot of the increase is borne out by the LNG program in Qatar. Actually, if you took that away, then the market would have more or less been flat year on year. Now, with the COVID-19 situation upon us, we've had to revise our forecast. Based on a 3-month economic lockdown or slowdown, we have revised our forecast for contract awards to $107 billion this year. Now, if the situation was to be with us for longer, up to 6 months, then our forecast in the worst case scenario is down to $87 billion, which of course would be a 20-year low for the market. So we do expect the market to be quite badly affected by the situation, however, maybe not as badly as some might expect. Next slide, please. And then, of course, looking forward, I think it's still important to bear in mind that there is a very significant pipeline of projects overall in the MENA region. There's more than $3 trillion worth of projects led by Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iraq, and so on. And I think it's always important to bear this in mind. There is a very significant need for projects. The populations are growing, power and demand growth is high. So need for social infrastructure such as housing, hospitals, education is very strong. And even if only half of that $3 trillion is awarded, that's still 10 years worth of work on a historical basis. So there's still a lot to be optimistic about despite the current situation. And then finally, I'm not going to dwell on the next slide too much, as Cynthia will cover it in her presentation, but obviously there are a number of strategies companies in the projects market space need to consider, both on a short-term, medium and long-term, and we'll leave this here for you later to look at, but Cynthia will go through in more details. So that's that from me. Thank you very much. I'll pass you over to Richard. I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. What I took from that presentation was that there is a significant and substantial impact of COVID-19 on projects in the first third of this year. That impact has varied from sector to sector and country to country, but the pipeline of planned projects remains huge, and the infrastructure needs in this region remain huge. So thank you to that. Now, we've had some questions in about slides. The slides will be made available to anyone who's registered to attend today, and the on-demand videos will be on the Mashreq Industry Insights Hub after the webinar is finished. Please keep your questions coming. We want to get as much value out of this webinar as we can. Okay, if we can move to the next slide, I'm going to hand over to Cynthia Corbett from Deloitte. Cynthia is the construction leader for Deloitte in the Middle East and has many years of experience in the region's construction industry. So over to you, Cynthia, for some of your thoughts on where we are today in GCC construction and UAE construction.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to MEED and to Mashreq for inviting Deloitte to participate in today's Connect series. If I could have the next slide, please, Nabil. Today, we just really wanted to focus on what contractors are doing, I guess, to respond to the crisis and what that immediate focus is and should continue to be. As we know, pre-COVID, the industry was already under significant pressure from low margins, increased competition, obviously lower volumes in projects, which Ed just illustrated through the trend over the last 4 years, all adding to quite significant liquidity pressure in the market pre-COVID. Unfortunately, COVID has now compacted and the cash and compounded the liquidity issue, and really just trying to see what the best way is for companies to mediate and meander through this very challenging time. So in terms of the respond phase, what I've set out there are some really key areas that we believe companies should focus on as contractors, and that is cash flow visibility. And we know typically long-term cash flows are done, but not necessarily short-term cash flows. And the need to change now to that short-term cash flow visibility is critical. And then adding in a layer of scenario planning. And really, when you're looking at that short-term cash flow visibility, understanding dependencies on backlog, especially looking at any projects that are suspended or being put on hold or terminated. And when you see the trend Ed just mentioned around 70 billion, what impact does that have on your immediate short-term cash flow? And how can you right-size your overheads to respond to that situation? Also looking at the dependency on winning new work. And obviously Ed has painted a good picture there in terms of forecast projects and what is expected to be awarded, but we've already seen a decline in April. So really a good understanding of dependency on new work, backlog coming through, and then also any dependency on claims being settled. And we know there are significant amounts of claims that contractors are dependent on in terms of their cash flow. And that was pre-COVID, and now post-COVID, even more dependent on those claims being settled to preserve cash through this period. The next point is obviously quantifying the impact of COVID on project costs with all the different measures that have been put in place to protect labor as well as staff on construction sites. Labor productivity has declined through social distancing measures, and there has been operational disruption to take account of all the different measures. So I think for contractors to get their arms around the impact on cost per project is the most critical need right now, to understand what impact that has on cash flow and being able to fund that in the short term, and then obviously to explore ways to recover those costs through the various legal mechanisms that have been discussed previously through these sessions. And then using the short-term measures that governments have released in terms of various directives to try and manage those overhead costs and reduce them in the short term, and then establishing mechanisms and procedures to prioritize cash disbursement. And that remains a critical focus to make sure that cash preservation is considered. And I wanted to emphasize as well the real need for a collaborative approach at this particular time in the market for the industry to minimize further economic disruption. And that becomes very critical for both the economy as well as the country, given construction has such a large impact on the economy. If we quickly touch on the recover phase, then obviously the strategic view remains very important and focus on effective project execution and then payment to contractors on time. And I'll emphasize on time. As I mentioned, pre-COVID, we had seen significant delays in payments to contractors, either through certifications taking longer than expected under contractual terms, or even one certified payment still being delayed. So through some of the surveys that we've done in our Powers of Construction publication annually, we have seen the number of days being pushed out significantly in the working capital cycle, taking up to almost 200 days now to collect cash. And we're just updating our survey, which, as Richard mentioned, we'll share with you in June, and we have seen those days being pushed well beyond 200 days now. So really trying to emerge a bit stronger from this respond phase towards what the new normal will be, and continued focus on assessing opportunities and collaborating with employers where project scope can be reduced where appropriate, or where the project is near completion, trying to focus on the best way to achieve that, and really focusing on that cash by project. And I know Mohammed referred to this in his opening, and I'm sure he'll talk about this more. But I think the key is that projects should be self-funded, and continuing to try and ring fence the cash per project and to try and have visibility at that particular level. And then real-time cash flow management. Hopefully we emerge from this in was expected to be 18 months to 2 years, to look forward to the new norm, which has been the subject of much debate and illustrated in the various white papers that have been shared with the Mashreq MEED Construction Club. So really looking forward to that new normal where we hope to build long-term enhancements in terms of contractual terms and conditions and how that impacts the supply chain as well. Better foundation for collaboration in the future, as well as a new level of engagement where we see better balance between risk and reward, and therefore build long-term enhancements to cash overall for the industry. So thank you, Richard. Those were the key points I wanted to share for now.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, and thank you to everyone for your questions that are coming in. We're not going to have a lot of time for questions once we get to them, so get them in now and we can address your question. Now, Cynthia set out basically, I took 3 parts from I understood there were 3 elements in Cynthia's presentation. There's the current phase, which is responding to the cash flow crisis, and that's about getting your head around your cost situation, the impact on your costs, and implementing short-term measures to manage your finances. Phase 2 is the recovery phase. That's about execution. That's about rescoping your project, self-financing project. And then phase 3 is the long-term enhancement of the way you work and the sort of structural changes. So 3 important parts to that. Now, we have several questions coming in for you, Cynthia, that I'll bring back to you once we've gone through the Wael and the other panelists. I would like to go now to Wael from Arab Tech. Now, as a leading, as the leader of a leading construction company in the region, Wael, what are your thoughts about the point that Cynthia and Ed have just made? But also, what are the things that you are having to deal with as a contractor?
Thank you, Richard. Thanks you, everyone. Ed, thank you, making it optimistic with the flow of works coming in. And Cynthia, truthful as always. I believe, yeah, cash is the most important. Everybody is in difficulties and it hits everyone. And to summarize it, as contractors, we got 3 things to do. One is honesty, and that's we need to look at ourselves, look at the problem, address them, and make the difficult decision we have to do during these times. Secondly, I can't stress the importance of collaboration across the supply chain. These are difficult times for everybody, not only the construction industry, all the industries in the world. The construction industry, if we don't cooperate and unfortunately share the pain, it's the new recipe of win-win-win is to minimize the loss for everybody. And the only way we can do that is by transparency and cooperative approach with the supply chain, the paymaster, the bank, with everybody. We got to address the issue and have an honest dialogue of what are we trying to do during this period. The same thing apply internally. We need to continuously update our business plan, be honest with ourselves, what can we and cannot achieve, and tailor our business toward that. It means consolidation of our business. It means getting rid of a lot of the unnecessary costs, which might be justified previously. However, these are difficult times and call for difficult decisions. And at the end, the king of all of it is cash, cash, cash. And how can we reserve it and how can we manage it? Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Now I'm going to quickly go to Colin Foreman, who is MEED's Deputy Editor. Then I'm going to come back to Cynthia and Wael with some questions that have been coming in. Keep your questions coming in. I just want to get round all of the panelists first. So Colin, as an analyst and a commentator on the construction industry, what's your sense of the sentiment in the market? You know, Cynthia has talked about these three phases and settling disputes and claims quickly and getting your head around cash. Ed has set out, I would say, an optimistic view of the pipeline, but also a realistic view of the immediate impact on the market. And Wael has also talked about the need for collaboration and transparency. What are people saying to you?
I think what Wael just said there, where he said that there's some hard decisions to make, really is the underlying issue that I think a lot of people are dealing with, and I think that's reflected in the sentiment. I think a lot of people are finding the trading environment very difficult. What I expect to see over the next few months, and you're starting to see it a little bit with some companies, is you're starting to see company strategies for the future starting to emerge. So you're seeing people streamlining their operations, maybe diversifying, just changing and trying to position themselves for the future. I think it's important to say that a lot of that was coming anyway. And I think what's happened over the last month or two has really forced those decisions to be made. So I'm looking to see quite a different construction industry over the next, start to look very different over the next 12 months. And then probably over the next year, 2-3 years, it'll be very different going forward.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Now, I want to just quickly come back to Mohammed. So as our host for today with Mashreq Bank, Mohammed, I'm going to put you on the spot to represent the whole of the banking industry, which obviously isn't your formal job, but Cynthia talked about cash flow, and one of the questions that we've had in is about what can construction companies do to manage and improve their working capital. So how does it look to you from a bank perspective? You know, what position does this put the banks in, and what do you want to see from construction companies?
Richard, for banks to finance contractors, I believe it's needs to continue to focus on the projects that the contractors are performing or doing. Now, in the past, the idea of ring fencing a project from a financing point of view for a contractor has always had a lot of pushback, especially from the companies wanted the freedom to move money around into different projects. And for Mashreq, I'll be speaking for Mashreq. We always encourage and support the contractors to actually make sure that the required financing for every project based on its cash flow is secured and ring-fenced. Meaning, if we are to finance a certain project, we understand that the contractor will go in with the intention to make money. They have the capability to perform. They have the capability to execute within the plan that they have bid for. Over time, the cash flows will change based on the variations that happen on the site, and the role of the bank will continue to plug in all of those shortfalls. However, that requires contractors to make sure that all these project proceeds are ring-fenced into that bank account. We have seen lately that during the crisis, the companies who have adopted this are getting the utmost support from their financiers to actually complete those projects. And I believe that this is the way forward. This is how we should move out of this era without really going into the general type financing for a construction company. Working capital for a project is usually or mostly driven by the cash flow, the payments that come in. The role of the bank is to plug in all these shortfalls for a temporary period of time, and I believe that this trend needs to be entrenched and move forward with it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm now going to move to your questions. We're at about halfway through. We've got 25 minutes going for the rest of this webinar, so I'm going to try and get through as many questions as I can. Please keep sending them in. It's very important. This is going to be quite rapid to our panelists, so we'll just move through them. So this is one for Weil. And I'm just going to read this out. You have criticized MEED's optimistic view. I'm not sure if you did criticize it, but what is your scenario for the next step? So I think the questioner is asking, what's your view of what the outlook looks like?
First of all, I did thank MEED for his optimistic view. If you took it, I hope you did not take it as a criticism. I'm not an economist. Definitely the pipeline have been affected, and this is why I said we need to be honest with ourselves. We can't just assume work is going to come. We have to work with what we have currently. We in Arabtech have impacted our business plan at least with 3 months of COVID-19 effect and expectation of award after August and September. And we are tailoring the business accordingly. I'd rather be safe than sorry. I'd rather be downsizing and then rebuild and regrow the company later on. And this is a better way of managing the current situation. If people think we're wrong and they are more optimistic, by all means, they can keep the size they want and continue with it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Cynthia, I think Mohammed touched on this, but what, as an auditor, with your sort of auditing and accountancy hat on, what can construction companies do to manage and improve their working capital requirements post-COVID?
The golden question. I do, and it's something we've been saying for a number of years, is having a close handle on the project costs by project. And what we've typically seen in the region is when clients come for a site visit or walk through the project, they're making changes. There are a huge volume of variations. The trends that we've tracked over the years, our projects can increase by 40 to 60% sometimes from the original budget because of the volume of change. Now, obviously, there are large capital projects and new technology comes out, so it's understandable that clients or employers would want the latest or the new design. But I think contractors need to get better at quantifying the impact of that change and advising the client to say, yes, we can do this change, but this is the cost impact. And once that then can be ring-fenced in that, as Mohammed said, looking at the cash flows for that project, they can then say, well, this is going to be the cost impact, and therefore you're going to need a further cash injection. I know some contractors have done that. It hasn't always resulted in an immediate agreement on the value of the variations, and there is some back and forth. But I think at least it opens the conversation for the clients and the employers to understand exactly what those changes are going to cost. And obviously that then also comes into play in terms of looking at the feasibility of that particular capital project, which is ultimately what the banks are looking at when they're funding that capital program. So I think that to me is the key in terms of how to better try and manage that cash leakage upfront on capital projects.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Cynthia. I'm going to stay with you, Cynthia, for the next question, but I might also turn to some of the other panelists. So this is about the impact of a second wave or a third wave. Now, in your presentation, Cynthia, you had your timeline with the three phases of response to this initial COVID outbreak, and we don't know what's going to happen with future waves. But what can we foresee? What would be the impact, and what places have we got? What measures have we got in place to mitigate the damage if there is a second wave or a third wave?
Oh, I don't think any of us have the answer to that specifically, but I suppose in the respond phase, what I was trying to emphasize is cash flow visibility and really different scenarios. And that scenario planning is absolutely critical for stakeholders to understand what the impact may be. And to Wael's point, being able to be responsive to that through right-sizing the organization, rather than keeping those overheads there, and having to deal with the impact that may have further down the line, or if and when bids come up, then just bidding them at various very low margins because you've got the overhead to cover. And we know that has other ramifications further down the line. So I think that all I can emphasize is the scenario planning is critical. So as and when, let's hope a second wave doesn't happen, but from what the scientists and medical industry are saying, it seems that is likely. Understanding how that scenario may unfold for each organization and what that decision tree then looks like, and being able to respond to that very quickly.
Okay, thank you. I would like to come back to Wael now. So one of the most vulnerable communities, I suppose we should call them, are the smaller companies, the SMEs, and the companies that are probably less able to borrow easily and with less financial resources. But obviously they're critical to the construction supply chain. So the questioner here is saying, what would be your advice for managing relationships with suppliers, as many suppliers to the construction industry are SMEs, who would be looking at the construction customers to settle their debt? And obviously that then goes up the tree to the project sponsors as well. But what thoughts do you have, Wael, on that, the supply chain relationships?
I mean, as you correctly said, the supply chain is very important, an integral part, and we consider them partner more than anything. Again, you need to be honest with them, direct approach, explain the problem, take care of them to a certain degree. However, unfortunately, you will pass part of the pain also to them. As I said in the beginning, it's the only win-win situation in the current circumstances is we try to reduce the pain across everyone. COVID-19 have left a dent in the industry. And if we throw the book at each one of us, the losses will become much larger. It will be hemorrhaging. So be honest with them, be fair to them, and deal with them as we'd like the main client to deal with you.
Okay, thank you.
Me, Richard.
Yes, Mohammed.
I support what Wael said regarding the supply chain. However, the big elephant in the room here is the work that needs to be done on getting work certified. And that is a collaborative approach that needs to happen between the main contractors and the project owners, or what we call the paymasters in this region. And if that is candidly addressed, I believe that financing partners could step in to ease up that cash flow issues. And the collaborative part should be at that level, and that could trickle all the way down to the rest of the supply chain.
Okay, thank you very much. Wael, I'm going to stay with you for a moment. We have a question here which is about the operational disruption So what impact are the safety measures? I guess this means the social distancing measures as well as any other measures that have been introduced since the crisis. What impact is that having on your costs and your scheduling?
It does have a fair bit of impact on the cost and the scheduling. I mean, it's no secret productivity have dropped. First of all, it took us a while to adjust to the new requirement. And once we adjust to them, they did add. I mean, dropping the number of riders in a bus, for example, indicates a larger number of buses, timing, etc. So all that we had to adapt with it. Hopefully, and not we wishing for, if a second turn of the disease, we are more ready for it. But it did affect our cost. Productivity in general from projects have dropped as low as 48% in some of the projects. Also, there is the psychological part. People are working, knowing they could be infected. They're trying to stay away. I mean, every document, we are an exempt industry, which means we go to the work sites. We mingle among any site between 500 to a couple of thousand of people, whether they're labor force or engineers, coming from different camps, different home, and we go back to our families. So all that does put a psychological pressure on the people operating in the field, and it does by return affect their productivity. There is a delays on the projects. We're talking with the clients about it, and we're recording the effect of the COVID as record to sit down around the table and agree a way forward. But again, as Cynthia said, it's no different than managing any other change. If we're going to go through the standard contractual procedure, finish the job, and then we'll talk about it and settle it at contract completion, it will be too late. We need now the collaborative approach where we can sit with the client and start understanding the effect, understanding the cost of it, who's responsible for it, and how can we come to an amicable interim solution so you don't starve the project and we can continue progressing it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this next question is also for you, Wael. As an effect of COVID-19, as a cost-cutting measure, can ArabTech as a leader take a stand to prevail upon engineers and developers to automatically grant EOT? Now, I'm afraid I don't know what EOT means. Maybe you do. Sorry?
Extension of time.
Extension of time, thank you very much. To grant extension of time and some kind of cash incentives to alleviate unnecessary documentation and litigation and unforeseen costs. So I'm guessing that ArabTech on its own is not... What's your view on this, being able to sort of speed up and reduce some of this paperwork and bureaucracy? Well,
as I said, I mean, that brings us to the first panel you guys did on the legality of COVID-19. Is it a force majeure? What are the laws we can use? Or more important, I bring it back to the think tank. I think we will try, obviously, to speed up, but I think the COVID-19, in a cynical way, have opened up everybody's eyes. Everybody now looking at the contract, what used to be acceptable, and maybe can we overlook, and maybe we can live on it. Suddenly, the COVID-19 is bringing everybody to square one and start reviewing everything. Can we live with this? Or as one of my former bosses used to say, in the perfect storm, with a kitchen sink happen, can we survive? I think now we have the mega perfect storm, and everybody is readdressing what can they accept, what they can do. One of the problems we have is previously contractors will put certain conditions, other contractors will accept it. I think the COVID-19 is making everybody aware with all the conditions, and they need to seriously look at it. And I encourage everybody to go and download the paper, which the think tank paper, and study the point, because a lot of effort went into it. And should we implement part of what was there, a lot of the questions being asked today could be resolved amicably, quickly, and a better solution for everybody. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Wael. Okay, Mohammed, I'm going to give Cynthia and Wael a break for a few moments. I'm going to come back to you on the banking side. So we had a lot of questions that relate to payment delays by the project clients and project paymasters. One here, it says, are the delays experienced by construction companies in collecting payments from governmental project owners, what strategies can banks employ to enhance debt payments from construction companies on government projects? So I guess the question is asking about, because it's government projects, there's a certain degree of certainty about payment. Does that play in the bank's thinking?
Okay, let me split this into two parts. One is the type of the project owner. Government-owned projects in the past few months have paid the payment have come in faster than before. Delays are reduced on the government projects. Now, the trick here, where people usually confuse it, is whether it is certified and paid or whether it is uncertified and therefore there's a delay in payment. Now, the most important part is certification. We understand as financiers that there might be a delay in that payment, and we are working closely with all our customers to cover that delay. However, there has to be a certification. There has to be a recognition of work that is done. If you are financing a contractor who is executing a project, and it has to be within that execution plan and cash flow. If a work is done and it is certified, by all means, banks will definitely look at covering that period of delay by financing the company on that specific project. Now, we need to be very clear on the ring fencing and the assignment of those proceeds. The best way today is that if you are to salvage existing projects, you go to the bank that is financing you on that project. Financing you meaning issuing your performance bond and advance payment guarantees, all those warranties that you had to do at the beginning of the project. And be very honest and clear. This is my execution plan. This is what is left for me as cost to complete. This is what is left in terms of payment. And this is what the paymaster is certifying. The bank will step in and definitely cover that gap. But to continue to behave in the same manner as we used to have, in the years before, where it is all general, we need to have financing in general for all the projects. It's a bit difficult today to be able to secure such financing. Break it down, put it into every project separately, earmark those payments, and bring it to the bank. Banks will definitely step in. We have been doing this since the beginning of the crisis. We've been doing it before, but since the beginning of the crisis, we focused on the projects on hand, and we have a commitment to all our customers to help them complete and execute those projects as smooth as possible.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive response there, Mohammed. Thank you. And we're down to close to the last 10 minutes, so if you do have questions, get them in. We will try and answer them. We have got a backlog already, though. So Cynthia, I'm going to come to you now. We have discussed delayed contractor payments for many years, and sadly the delay or lack of payment continues across the industry. I'm keen to understand what legal changes the panel think that the government can make to guarantee on-time payments to contractors and consultants that are due under the contract. And perhaps if you know of any other governments that have implemented similar laws. So Cynthia, I'll come to you on this one. What's your view on what would be required to sort of force on-time payments?
Unfortunately, I'm not a lawyer. I'm an accountant, so we need one of our legal panelists for this question specifically. So I unfortunately can't give a legal view to answer that. question. But I think if we refer to the white papers that were discussed, you know, there are terms and conditions in the contract with set payment terms there. And I think it just goes back to that collaborative, you know, the collaboration that is required in terms of understanding when you're bidding for the project as well, where the key source of funding is coming from. And just wanting to emphasize again, understanding, you know, the cash flows on a project by project basis is critical. And in this region, typically contractors don't stop working when they aren't paid, just because of who the paymasters are sometimes, and long-term relationships. Whereas perhaps in other markets, you know, if contractors aren't paid under the terms of their contracts, they will enforce those terms a lot sooner than we ever see in this region. But unfortunately, can't offer a legal view on that.
Okay, that's fine. So I don't expect panelists to go beyond their sort of expertise. So if you do have questions, there are a few legal questions in there. What we'll do is we'll circulate everyone's questions to the panelists, and we can go back to some of our previous legal panelists. Or if you are indeed a lawyer watching this broadcast and you want to help answer some of these questions, we can try and get back through that method. I'm going to come to Colin and Ed now. We've got a couple of market outlook questions, which I'll put to the MEED people. Ed, in your presentation, you talked about a pipeline across the region of $3 trillion worth of planned projects. And you also set out the key projects that are being tendered or at an advanced stage of pre-execution at the moment. How do you see 2021 and 2022? So slightly sort of medium term, if you like. Do we think that the lower oil prices are going to, once we get through the immediate crisis, that we will actually see some ongoing slowdown in project activity?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Well, first of all, with the long-term outlook, I mean, that pipeline has been a pretty similar figure, or growing slightly for many years now. And I think it's important when looking at the market to look at the short-term, medium-term, and clearly the market has been affected, short-term. So I don't want to paint an overly optimistic picture, because I think clearly we're into a new paradigm now, and I think after COVID-19, it may well be that lower oil prices cause more problems for the projects market than the virus itself. And that's true for going into 2021, 2022, because we've already seen governments announce quite a large amount of cuts, particularly when it comes to capital spending. We've seen $8 billion in Qatar announced to be cut. We've seen 50% of projects funding to be cut in Dubai, for example. Saudi Arabia is talking about an $8-9 billion cut in capital projects. So clearly, there are going to be fewer projects coming to the market. Now, the question is, these projects which are being cut this year, postponed or delayed, will they be sort of backlogged and come to the market again next year? And I think it's too early to say. We just don't know how the oil price is going to recover. We don't know what will happen to these projects. But what I will say is the government's obviously going to reprioritize their project spending, and it'll be some time before we know what their priorities are going to be. But at the end of the day, it's always the projects which are essential: the social infrastructure projects, the housing, the education, the healthcare projects, which are normally given the priority. And then, of course, the utility projects, power and water schemes, particularly if they're financed by the private sector. Are nice to have, iconic projects. We have to wait and see what happens to them. So my outlook for 21-22 is, I would say, more on the pessimistic side right now, but of course it depends a lot on the oil price and how quickly we recover from this pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Colin, just following on from Ed's observations there, and we've had a question: what is having the bigger structural impact? Is it COVID-19 and all the economic recession, or is it oil prices, which, as Ed suggested, we might be in a new paradigm for oil prices? So what do you think is people should really be paying attention to?
Well, I think the COVID situation is a short-term problem that's bringing the most pain at the moment. And then in the long term, the oil price question is potentially something that could play out over the next decade, which I think is a concern for people. I think it's very difficult to distinguish between the two because I think the oil price is affecting government budgets, whereas COVID doesn't necessarily affect a government budget, but it does disrupt the economy. So I think it's almost impossible to separate the two and say which one's causing the bigger impact at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're coming into the last few minutes. I've probably got time for some closing remarks. I just wonder if I can come to you, Wael, for some closing remarks. We've obviously touched on a lot of things, a lot of issues today, but what's your feeling about the next 18 months?
Look, there's a lot of uncertainty. The only certain thing is the world after COVID-19 is not going to be the same as it was before. And people will make sure things are changing. In a certain way, I'm optimistic and hopefully that once everything's settled, the government to reinitiate the economic wheel, they will need to issue infrastructure project to start the flow of money into the business and revive or kickstart the economy again. And we need to be ready for it. However, no one knows the certainty when it's going to happen. And for that, we need to preserve ourselves and improve our immunity for whatever could come next.
Okay, thank you very much. And Cynthia, we've just got a few seconds for a final comment from you. Of the things that you've touched on in your presentation, what would have the biggest benefit to keeping construction going through the sort of the immediate crisis and the next few months?
Yes. Thank you, Richard. I think the key is just to stress collaboration and trying to release those long overdue payments, which are over 200 days due now, so that contractors and the supply chain can continue to be funded. Otherwise, I think they will struggle to survive through the crisis. And that cash flow visibility and scenario planning is absolutely vital.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've run out of time. I'm going to bring the discussion to an end. Thank you very much indeed to all of our panelists today. And thank you to you for submitting your questions and for joining us. I would like to remind you that we are trying to do a feedback survey. We'd like to get your opinions on how we can make these webinars even better for you. The pop-up link, or the link is on the screen now, and Nabil has just put the pop-up there. If you click on that link, you can give us your feedback immediately, or you can wait until you get the slides and click on the link on that slide. But please give us your feedback. It's important to us. Now, just for a final closing remark, I'm going to hand back to Mohammed, our host for today from Mashreq Bank, to say a few closing comments, and then we shall finish for the session. Over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you all for being with us. Please feel free to reach out to us anytime for any inquiry or suggestion on future topics. As always, I encourage everyone and every company to reach out to their bankers to try to find out a way that they can help them to go through these difficult times. Wish you all Eid Mubarak. This is Mashreq. Stay safe, stay connected.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you.